Detective Lena Diaz, fueled by stale coffee and the fluorescent hum of the Bardstown Police Department's cold case unit, thought it was just another late night in November 2024. Rain lashed against the thick glass of the window, blurring the lights of the quiet Kentucky town. Her office was a graveyard of good intentions. Grey filing cabinets held the files of men and women who had become ghosts long before they died. On her desk, illuminated by the spill of her monitor, was the file Davenport, Sarah Beth. It was thick, the manila folder soft and frayed at the edges, the original typewritten reports dated 1988, 36 years. Diaz was only 5 years old when Sarah Beth, known to everyone as Sunny, had vanished from the parking lot of the old Kentucky diner. Diaz had been staring at the victim's intake photo for an hour. Sunny, 22, with a burst of blonde-red hair, a wide smile, and eyes that seemed to know a joke Diaz wasn't in on. She was the town's lost girl, the cautionary tale. Diaz was waiting for a call, not from a person, but from a system. 6 months prior, she had submitted the only piece of physical evidence they had, a torn scrap of denim from a jacket found near the scene, which had been stored in a climate-controlled locker since a 2015 re-evaluation. The original 1988 tests were useless. The 2015 tests found degraded DNA, but not enough to run through CODIS. But technology had leaped forward again. Diaz had argued for weeks to get the budget approval for a forensic genetic genealogy test using a specialized lab in Virginia. They were going to try to build a family tree from that microscopic 36-year-old sample. Diaz's desk phone, a modern VoIP she hated, chirped with an electronic impersonal sound. It was the lab. Her hand was shaking slightly as she picked it up. "Detective Diaz." The voice on the other end was clinical, precise, but Diaz could hear the subdued excitement. The lab technician confirmed the upload. They had a match, or rather, they had a family. The DNA didn't match a criminal in the database, but it matched a distant cousin in Oregon who had uploaded their 23andMe profile to a public database. The lab had worked backward, building a family tree. The degraded DNA belonged to a male, and the familial line pointed with statistical certainty to one of 3 brothers who had lived in Nelson County in 1988. Diaz already had the names pulled up. 2 were dead. 1 was very much alive. Her eyes traveled from the name on the screen to a different file on her desk. A file not for a cold case, but for the Bardstown City Council, detailing participants in the annual Christmas parade. Diaz felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't a drifter, it wasn't a stranger. It was a name she saw on park benches, on plaques for charitable donations. Thomas Vance, a pillar of the community. A man who had, she suddenly recalled from the old files, even given a tearful interview to the local paper in 1988, pleading for the sweet girl's safe return. She looked back at the smiling photo of Sunny Davenport. The silence of 36 years was about to shatter, and it was going to bring the whole town down with it. May 14th, 1988. The Kentucky air was already thick with the promise of a humid summer, the scent of cut grass and damp earth hanging heavy. For Sarah Beth Sunny Davenport, it was just another Saturday. She was 22, and life felt like a song she was still learning the chords to. She spent the morning in her small apartment above a hardware store, her fingers calloused from practicing on her beat-up acoustic guitar. Posters of The Cure and REM were thumbtacked to the floral wallpaper, a testament to her dreams of moving to Nashville or maybe just Louisville. Her younger sister, Maggie, then 16, was sprawled on her shag rug, flipping through a copy of 17. "You're working a double," Maggie complained, not looking up. "But the drive-in is showing Beetlejuice again." Sunny laughed, a bright, easy sound that was the source of her nickname. "Gotta pay for this rock and roll lifestyle, Mags." She pulled her mass of blonde red hair into a high ponytail, securing it. "Tips are good on Saturdays. Mr. Vance even fixed that squeaky booth." Maggie made a face. Thomas Vance, their landlord, and the owner of the building that housed the diner, was always around. He acted like the town patriarch, but Maggie thought he was creepy. "He just stares," Maggie muttered. "He's just old-fashioned," Sunny said, dismissing it. She grabbed her denim jacket, the one with the Pretenders patch sewn onto the back. "Besides, I need every dime. That festival in Lexington isn't going to play itself." She was a waitress at the Old Kentucky Diner, a classic chrome and vinyl spot on the edge of town that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She loved the chaos of it. The gossip from the old-timers, the familiarity of the menu. That afternoon, the diner was buzzing. Sunny moved with an easy grace, balancing plates, refilling coffees, her laughter echoing off the formica. Tom Vance was indeed there, sitting in the corner booth, the one he fixed. He was in his early 30s, already successful, with a young family. He waved her over. "How's that car of yours running, Sunny?" he asked, his voice a low, friendly drawl. "Still rattling, Mr. Vance," she admitted. "I think it's the alternator." "You let me know. A girl like you shouldn't be stranded." He smiled, but his eyes lingered. She thanked him, refilled his coffee, and moved on. The shift dragged on. Day bled into evening, the jukebox playing endless repeats of George Michael. By 11:00 p.m., she was exhausted, her feet aching, but she was counting the thick wad of tips in her apron, enough for the festival entry fee, and then some. As she cleaned the last table, Maggie came in, smelling like popcorn and cherry coke. "Ready to go to Whiskey Point?" Maggie asked. It was the local high school hangout, a bluff overlooking the county. "Almost," Sunny sighed. "Just gotta cash out. Don't wait up, I'll meet you there. It's my last double for a while, I promise." Maggie brightened. "Okay, but you're borrowing my tape." Sunny smiled. "Deal." As Maggie turned to leave, Sunny called out, "Hey, Mags, my clip broke." She pointed to her unruly hair, already escaping the ponytail. "Can I borrow yours?" "The turquoise one?" Maggie unclipped the plastic barrette from her own hair. "Don't lose it, it's my favorite." Sunny clipped the bright turquoise into her own hair. "I promise," she said, winking. "First thing tomorrow." It was the last thing she ever said to her. Midnight came and went. The Old Kentucky Diner finally emptied. The cook, a man named Sal, was wiping down the grill, the smell of grease and onions thick in the air. "You heading straight out, Sunny?" Sal asked, not looking up from his work. "Yeah, meeting Maggie and the crew at the Point," she said, yawning as she untied her apron. She counted her tips, stuffing the bills into the pocket of her jeans. She grabbed her denim jacket. "That car of yours gonna make it?" Sal asked, echoing Tom Vance from earlier. "She's gotta," Sunny laughed. "See you Monday, Sal." "Night, kid." She pushed through the double doors into the parking lot. The night air was a shock after the stuffy diner. It was quiet, the highway a distant hum. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for Sal's truck, a visiting salesman's Buick, and her own rusty Ford Escort parked under the flickering sodium light at the far end. She fumbled for her keys. At Whiskey Point, 3 miles away, Maggie sat on the hood of a friend's Camaro, passing around a lukewarm soda. The stars were brilliant, unfiltered by city light. 12:30 a.m. "Where is she?" Maggie asked, annoyed. "Probably counting her tips again," her friend Mark said, tuning the radio. "She'll be here." But the annoyance was already beginning to curdle in Maggie's stomach. Sunny was often late, but she always showed up. The air was getting cooler. The crickets in the surrounding woods seemed to be getting louder, filling the silence. 1:00 a.m. A car's headlights appeared on the winding road up to the point. Maggie sat up, hopeful, but it was just a Chevy Nova full of guys they didn't know. They drove past slowly, then sped off. The feeling of unease was sharp now. "Let's drive past the diner," Maggie said, her voice small. "Just to check." Mark grumbled but agreed. The Camaro's engine rumbled to life. They drove back down the dark country road. The diner was a dark box, its neon open sign cold and black. But as they pulled into the lot, Maggie's heart seized. Sunny's Ford Escort was still there, parked exactly where she always left it. But Sunny was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe she got a ride," Mark offered, but his voice lacked conviction. Maggie jumped out of the Camaro. "Sunny!" she yelled, her voice sounding thin in the empty lot. "Sunny!" Nothing, just the wind blowing a paper napkin across the asphalt. Maggie ran to the Escort. She pulled the handle. The driver's side door was unlocked. Sunny never, ever left her car unlocked. Maggie felt the first icy touch of real fear. She looked in. The car was empty. Her keys weren't in the ignition. Her purse, a worn leather satchel, was gone, but her guitar, the one she cherished, was still visible on the back seat. She wouldn't have left that. Maggie looked around, her eyes scanning the shadows by the dumpsters, the dark line of trees at the edge of the property. "Something's wrong," Maggie whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Something is really wrong." The drive home was a blur of panic and denial. Maggie burst through the door of their small house at 1:45 a.m., waking her mother, Evelyn. "Mum, Sunny's not at the diner. Her car is there, but she's gone." Evelyn Davenport, a woman who had raised 2 girls on her own, was instantly terrifyingly awake. The sleep was gone from her eyes, replaced by a sharp, focused dread. "What do you mean, gone?" "Her car is there, unlocked. She's not at Whiskey Point. She's just gone." Evelyn grabbed her keys and a flashlight, not even stopping to put on shoes over her slippers. The 2 of them drove back to the diner, the silence in the car vibrating with unspoken fears. The Escort was still there, a lonely metallic island under the buzzing light. Evelyn conducted her own search. She was methodical, her hands shaking as she opened the passenger door, then the back. The guitar was there, but her purse, which Evelyn knew contained her wallet and her tips, was gone. "She was robbed," Evelyn said, the words coming out flat. "No," Maggie said, her voice trembling. She was pointing to the ground beside the driver's door. There, glinting in the beam of Evelyn's flashlight, was a single small silver earring, one of a pair Sunny wore every day. Evelyn picked it up. She looked at the dark line of trees behind the diner, the area near the dumpsters that was shrouded in shadow. "We're calling the police," Evelyn said, her voice a steel rod. They drove to the nearest payphone at the 24-hour gas station. Evelyn's fingers fumbled with the quarter. The call was a nightmare of frustration. The dispatcher, a man sounding bored and tired, was dismissive. "Ma'am, she's 22 years old. It's a Saturday night. She probably just went off with a friend. We can't file a missing persons report for an adult for at least 24 hours. Evelyn was furious. Her car is there. Her guitar is in the car. Her earring is on the ground. She's not off with a friend. "I'm sorry, ma'am. That's the policy. Call back tomorrow if she doesn't turn up." Evelyn slammed the receiver down so hard it rang. "They're not coming." The realization was crushing. They were alone in this. They drove back to the diner again, as if willingness alone could make Sonny reappear. They sat in Evelyn's car, watching the escort as the sky began to lighten in the east, turning from black to a bruised purple. The first birds began to sing. The beauty of the Kentucky dawn felt like an insult. At 5:00 a.m., Sal's truck pulled into the lot for the Sunday morning prep. He saw Evelyn's car and walked over, his face etched with confusion. "Mrs. Davenport? Maggie? What's going on?" "Sal, when did Sonny leave last night?" Evelyn asked, her voice raw. Sal's face went pale. Round midnight, just after. She walked out right after I did. I saw her walking to her car." "Did you see anything else? Anyone else?" Sal hesitated. I thought I saw another car pull up, a dark one. I was tired. I was just looking at my own truck. I didn't pay it much mind. I heard her laugh, I think." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "You heard her laugh? Or maybe it was a shout." Sal was confused now, the memory already hazy. "I don't know. I'm sorry." As the sun climbed, bathing the empty parking lot in a sickly yellow light, the dread solidified. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a late night. This was a void. Sarah Beth Davenport was truly, inexplicably gone. The first 24 hours were a chaotic fog of disbelief. After Sal's fragmented, confusing statement, Evelyn drove straight to the Bardstown police station. Walking in just as the day shift was clocking on, she refused to be brushed off. "My daughter is missing. Her name is Sarah Beth Davenport. She is 22. She was last seen at the Old Kentucky Diner at midnight. Her car is still there. I am not leaving until you send someone." Her raw maternal fury cut through the morning bureaucracy. A young detective, Frank Holloway, was assigned. He looked tired, his coffee cup steaming, and his eyes held a weary resignation that was terrifying to Maggie. He didn't seem to grasp the urgency. "Ma'am," Holloway began, 9 times out of 10, a 22-year-old. "This is the 10th time," Evelyn snapped. Holloway sighed and grabbed a notepad. He followed them back to the diner, which was now opening for the Sunday breakfast rush. The diner's owner, flustered, gave them free coffee. Holloway walked the parking lot. He noted the escort. He saw the earring which Evelyn had left, fearing that moving it would ruin the evidence. He bagged it. He looked at the guitar. "Okay, so the car's unlocked," Holloway said, jotting notes. "Purse is gone. Looks like a robbery. She probably got spooked and ran off, or the guy took her with him." He said it so clinically. The guy. By 10:00 a.m. word had spread. Friends, family and diner regulars started showing up. The diner's parking lot became an impromptu headquarters. Maps of Nelson County were spread on the hoods of cars. People were asking, "Where do we look?" Holloway, suddenly faced with a civilian search party, became more organized. "We need to be systematic," he announced. "We'll search the immediate area, the woods behind the diner, the ditch along the highway." The search began. It was a surreal, terrible procession. Maggie, her heart pounding a sick rhythm against her ribs, walked in a line with strangers, all of them staring at the ground, pushing back thorny branches, calling her sister's name. "Sonny! Sonny!" The name echoed in the dense, humid woods, but the only reply was the cawing of crows. Every flicker of discarded trash, a soda can, a fast food wrapper, made her heart stop, thinking it was a clue. The police, meanwhile, were conducting interviews. Sal, the cook, was questioned again. He was nervous, his story shifting. "It was a dark car, maybe a truck, I don't know. I just saw headlights. I didn't see the driver. Sonny, she didn't scream. I'm sure I would have heard a scream." Detective Holloway looked for other clues. Behind the diner, near the overflowing dumpsters, he found something. Snagged on a chain-link fence that separated the lot from the woods, there was a large piece of blue denim. It was torn, as if ripped from a garment by the metal fence. Holloway looked at it. It had a bit of a patch, some embroidery. He bagged it, labeling it torn fabric fence line. He didn't know it was from Sonny's jacket. He just knew it was out of place. By 6:00 p.m., the search was losing steam. The searchers were covered in sweat, bug bites and scratches. There was no sign of Sonny. That evening, the local news station sent a truck. A reporter interviewed Evelyn, who stood stiffly, her face a mask of grief, pleading for her daughter's return. "If you have her, please, just let her go. We won't ask any questions. Just bring my baby home." Maggie watched from the car, unable to speak. The 24-hour mark passed. Midnight, May 15th. Sonny was officially a missing person. The file was opened. The search had yielded nothing but a torn piece of fabric and a single earring. The hope that had sustained them through the day was replaced by a cold, sharp, terrifying exhaustion. The first week was a slow-motion unraveling of hope. Monday morning, May 16th, the story hit the front page of the Kentucky Standard. Local waitress vanishes. The black and white photo they used was Sonny's high school graduation picture, 2 years old. She looked innocent, young, unlike the vibrant 22-year-old she had become. The photo made her look like a child, and it set the tone for the town's reaction. This was a violation. The police, now taking the case seriously, ramped up their efforts. Detective Holloway had the escort towed to the police garage, where it was dusted for prints. The results were a mess. Dozens of partials, mostly Sonny's, Maggie's, and other friends, nothing usable. They did find her purse wedged deep under the driver's seat, as if kicked there in a struggle. Her wallet was gone. This strengthened Holloway's robbery gone wrong theory. The donation jar at the diner's counter, usually for the local baseball team, was relabeled Sonny Davenport Search Fund. Money poured in. The diner's owner offered a $1,000 reward. Thomas Vance, the prominent landlord, publicly matched it, bringing the total to $2,000. He gave an interview to the paper, expressing his shock. "Sonny was a light in this community," Vance told the reporter, his voice thick with concern. "We are all praying for her. I've told the police to check my properties, to do whatever it takes. This cannot stand." His words were a comfort to the community. He was organizing, taking action. Maggie, however, felt a strange revulsion reading his quote. She remembered her own words from just days before. "He just stares." But she said nothing, burying the thought. It felt disloyal, grasping at straws. The search parties continued, but their focus shifted. They moved from the immediate area to the surrounding parks, the creeks, the winding back roads of Nelson County. Volunteers on horseback combed the dense trails of the Bernheim forest. Flyers, printed at a local Kinko's, papered the town. Sonny's smiling face was on every telephone pole, in every gas station window, on every truck stop bulletin board from Bardstown to Louisville. The phone line set up at the Davenport house rang constantly. Every call was a jolt of adrenaline, followed almost always by a crash. There were false sightings. A trucker thought he saw her at a rest stop in Tennessee. A woman in Lexington swore she saw her getting on a bus. Each lead was tracked by Holloway, and each one evaporated, wasting precious time and emotional energy. The family was breaking. Evelyn chain-smoked, sitting by the phone, while Maggie walked the streets, putting up more flyers, her knuckles raw from the stapler. She felt guilty for every second she wasn't doing something. Guilt that she hadn't waited at the diner. Guilt that she'd been at Whiskey Point. Guilt for lending her the turquoise hair clip, which she now saw as a terrible, cursed object. By Friday, the mood had soured. The search parties were smaller. The news crews had moved on to a highway pile-up. The sheer, grinding exhaustion was setting in. Rumors, dark and insidious, began to fill the vacuum of information. I heard she was into drugs. She owed someone money. She ran off to Nashville with some musician. The family had to fight not only the unknown, but also the whispers that were tarnishing Sonny's memory. Saturday, May 21st. 1 week, 7 days. It felt like a lifetime. The family held a small candlelight vigil in the diner parking lot. Only 30 people showed up. The rain had started again, a cold spring drizzle that extinguished the candles as quickly as they were lit. The hope that had been a bonfire was now a sputtering wet ember. The realization was complete. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't coming home. The human tragedy of Sarah Beth Davenport now began its long, slow transformation into a case file. In the cramped, smoke-filled offices of the Bardstown Police Department, a new cardboard box was labeled Davenport, SB, 88 to 1542. Into this box went the bagged earring, the torn piece of denim from the fence, the inconclusive fingerprint lifts from the escort, and the plaster casts of tire tracks found near the dumpster. Detective Frank Holloway, now the lead on a full-blown, high-pressure investigation, was overwhelmed. He was a decent cop, but he was a small-town cop, used to DUIs and domestic disputes. This, a presumed abduction, a possible homicide with no body, was beyond his scope. The department's resources were a joke. Their forensics lab was a glorified closet with an old microscope and an ink pad. Holloway was working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of frustration. He re-interviewed Sal the cook. Sal's story, under the pressure of a formal police interrogation, solidified, but in the wrong way. "I'm sure I just saw headlights," he now said defensively. "It was dark. I didn't see a truck, maybe a sedan, a dark sedan." Holloway wrote it down. Dark sedan. The truck was forgotten. He interviewed everyone who had been at the diner that day, dozens of people. They all said the same thing. Sonny was her usual self, happy, smiling. She mentioned the music festival. She mentioned her car troubles. One name came up repeatedly, but only as a witness: Thomas Vance. Holloway interviewed him in his immaculate real estate office. Vance was the picture of concerned cooperation. He sat forward, his hands clasped. "Detective, anything I can do? I was there for lunch, yes. Spoke to Sonny. She was worried about her car. I even offered to have my mechanic take a look." He provided a timeline. He'd left the diner around 2:00 p.m., went to his office, then was home with his wife and kids all evening. His wife confirmed it. "He was home by 5:30, Detective," Mrs. Vance said, her eyes wide with worry. "We had dinner, watched the Golden Girls. He never left." An airtight alibi for the time of the abduction. Vance was a witness, nothing more. He was checked off the list. The investigation focused instead on the robbery angle. Holloway and his team spent weeks chasing down known transients, small-time criminals, and any dark sedan that had been reported for suspicious activity. They pulled files on every known sex offender in a 3-county radius. It was a wide, shallow net, and it caught nothing. The evidence box was sealed and placed in the BPD evidence room, a damp, poorly lit basement area. The torn denim sat in its paper bag, the microscopic DNA on it already beginning to degrade in the Kentucky humidity. The chain of custody was logged, and the box took its place among hundreds of others, unsolved burglaries, drug busts, and other older ghosts. The weeks turned into months. Summer arrived, thick and oppressive. The flyers with Sonny's face curled and faded in the sun, the ink running in the summer storms. The case was no longer on the front page. The failure of the investigation was not a single event, but a slow, quiet sinking. By the fall of 1988, the leads had dried up completely. The hotline, once ringing off the hook, was silent. Detective Holloway, under pressure from his superiors to manage his caseload, moved the Davenport file from the active tray on his desk to the pending cabinet. It was the first step toward the cold. The errors, in hindsight, were glaring. The dark sedan from Sal's corrected testimony sent the police chasing the wrong vehicle, while the dark truck he first mentioned to Maggie was never logged as an official lead. The perimeter of the diner was searched, but not thoroughly enough. The forensics of 1988 were the real culprit. They couldn't do anything with the torn denim fabric, so it sat. They didn't have the technology to analyze the degraded-looking mud on the tire track castings. The investigation was a victim of its time. In 1989, a year after Sonny vanished, the Davenport family held another vigil. This time, only a handful of people came. The town was moving on. They were uncomfortable with the raw, unresolved grief of Evelyn and Maggie. It was a mirror of their own vulnerability. People wanted to believe Bardstown was safe, and the persistent, unsolved vanishing of a 22-year-old girl contradicted that belief. They began to file the case away in their minds, under tragedy unexplained. In 1990, Detective Frank Holloway, weary and burned out, accepted a promotion and a transfer to a larger department in Louisville. He had to pack up his desk. He looked at the Davenport file, now thick with dead-end reports. He felt a pang of guilt. It was the one that got away, the one that would haunt him. He handed the file to his replacement, a new detective who didn't know the faces, the family, the pain. "It's cold," Holloway said by way of explanation. The new detective nodded, took the file, and placed it in the tall metal inactive cabinet. The case was officially cold. The sound of the metal drawer shutting was, for the justice system, the final sound. For Maggie and Evelyn, it was the beginning of a different kind of torture. The police had given up. They had failed. The world had moved on, and Sonny was still gone. The silence that followed was heavy and complete. The file was closed. The parking lot was just a parking lot, and the Davenports were left alone in their grief. trapped in the amber of that one terrible night in 1988, while the rest of the world, including the man who knew the truth, simply continued to live. Time moved on, as it always does, mercilessly and without regard for the wreckage it leaves behind. The 1980s gave way to the 1990s. The world changed, but Sunny Davenport's room remained a museum. Evelyn refused to change a thing. The posters of The Cure faded, the edges curling. The acoustic guitar in the corner gathered a thick layer of dust, its strings long since gone slack. A fine silt of grief settled over the house. Evelyn developed a persistent cough, a rattling in her chest that seemed to be the physical manifestation of her unspoken sorrow. She sat in the living room, smoking, watching the seasons change through the window, waiting for a call that would never come. Maggie stayed. She couldn't leave Bardstown. It felt like a betrayal. Leaving would be like admitting Sunny was really gone forever. She graduated high school, her cap and gown feeling like a costume. She took a job at the Nelson County Public Library, finding comfort in the quiet, dusty shelves, in the organized systems where everything had a place and nothing was ever truly lost, just misshelved. She married a quiet, kind man who understood her sadness, even if he didn't know its full depth. They had a son in 1995. They named him David. Life, in its stubborn way, was happening, but the loss was a shadow that touched everything. Every May 14th, Maggie brought a bouquet of daisies, Sunny's favorite, to the edge of the diner parking lot. The diner itself had closed in 1993. The building sat empty for a few years, a decaying monument to her sister's last moments, before it was sold and turned into a sterile, bright laundromat. Maggie would stand there by the washers, trying to remember the smell of coffee and grease, trying to picture Sunny's laugh. She would see Thomas Vance around town. He was thriving. He'd been elected to the city council in 1992, his family man image and business success making him a popular local figure. He was on the board of the bank. He coached Little League. When he saw Maggie, he would always offer a somber, respectful nod. "Miss Maggie," he'd say, his voice full of practiced sympathy, "still praying for your family." Each word was a tiny, sharp blade in her heart. She would just nod back, unable to speak, and hurry away. The 90s were a decade of quiet, aching emptiness. The case was gone from the public mind. It was just a story the old-timers told. Maggie was no longer Maggie. She was that poor girl whose sister vanished. The emptiness was a physical presence, a member of the family, the one who sat at the head of the table. In 2004, Evelyn Davenport passed away from emphysema. Her death was a quiet, expected tragedy, but for Maggie, it was a second severing. She was now the sole keeper of the flame. After the funeral, as she was cleaning out her mother's house, she found the boxes. Evelyn had saved everything. Every newspaper clipping, every sympathy card, every note she'd taken during the first few weeks. But there was also a copy of the police file. Maggie hadn't known her mother had it. In the late 90s, Evelyn had filed a Freedom of Information Act request. The file was heavily redacted, large sections blacked out, but it was there. That night, Maggie took the boxes to her own basement. She was 32 years old, a mother, a wife, a librarian, and she became an investigator. She spread the files out on her folding table, the musty smell of paper and despair filling the room. She read Holloway's notes. She saw the witness lists. She saw the dead ends. But she also saw the gaps. Her librarian's mind, trained in finding patterns and missing information, kicked in. She cross-referenced the redacted names with her own memories, with her mother's notes. She began to see the investigation not as a failed effort, but as a flawed one. She focused on Sal's testimony. Her mother's notes from that first morning were clear. Sal said dark truck, maybe Vance's. But the official police report said dark sedan. Why the change? Maggie became obsessed. The grief, which had been a passive, heavy blanket, now had a direction. It was a pinpoint of light. She started a new ritual. After her husband and son were asleep, she would go down to the basement. She bought a new computer and scanner. She learned how to use the burgeoning internet forums, Websleuth's The Doe Network. She became Maggie D88. She posted Sunny's story. She scanned the faded flyers. She connected with a world of other people trapped in the same amber of grief, other sisters, mothers, and daughters of the missing. She learned from them. She learned about forensics, about DNA, about how cases were supposed to be handled. She realized the torn piece of denim, mentioned once in the file and then forgotten, was the key. It was from Sunny's favorite jacket. Maggie knew that jacket. She still had a photo of Sunny wearing it. By 2008, 20 years had passed. Her son was a teenager. Her basement was a state-of-the-art cold case office. Her obsession was total, but it was quiet. It was her secret, her penance, her purpose. She wasn't just grieving, she was hunting. The pain, once a paralyzing force, began to transform into fuel. Maggie was no longer just a victim of a tragedy. She was an agent of change. Her research into other cold cases had shown her that silent families were forgotten families. She would not be silent. In 2010, she stepped out of the basement and into the public eye, but she was a different woman. The timid, grieving sister was gone, replaced by a focused, articulate advocate. She founded a small non-profit, Kentucky's Forgotten, dedicated to raising awareness for the state's unsolved missing persons and homicide cases. Her first project was a billboard. She used her own savings to rent a large billboard on the main highway outside Bardstown. It featured a high-resolution, age-progressed image of Sunny, what she might look like at 44, next to her original 1988 photo. The text was simple. Missing, Sarah Beth Sunny Davenport. Vanished May 14th, 1988. Do you know something? $5,000 reward. The reward was her own money. The billboard was a shock to the town. It forced them to remember. It made them uncomfortable again, which was exactly what Maggie wanted. She began lobbying the state legislature. She drove to Frankfurt, her car loaded with binders, each one telling the story of a forgotten victim. She spoke at small, poorly attended committee meetings. She argued for a centralized, state-funded cold case unit, one that would have the resources and the technology that the Bardstown PD lacked in 1988. She was dismissed at first. "Ma'am, the budget..." But she kept coming back, session after session, year after year. Her grief had given her an inhuman patience. She became an expert on forensic science, specifically the new frontiers of DNA testing. In 2012, she formally petitioned the Bardstown Police Department to retest the evidence in her sister's case. The police chief, a new man who barely remembered the case, was resistant. The evidence was old. The chain of custody might be compromised. It was expensive. "We can't just go opening 25-year-old boxes," he told her. "Why not?" she asked, her voice quiet but unyielding. She found an ally, a young, ambitious county prosecutor who saw the potential for justice and the good press. He pushed, and the chief relented. In 2015, the Davenport 88 to 1542 box was pulled from the evidence room. It was damp, the cardboard soft, but the seals were intact. The torn piece of denim, still in its 1988 paper bag, was sent to the Kentucky State Police Forensic Lab. The call came 3 months later. It was a partial victory. The lab technician was cautious. "Ma'am, the sample is extremely degraded, but we did find something, a partial DNA profile, male, not enough to run through CODIS, the national database. But we've isolated it. We can preserve it. It was the first new information in 27 years, a partial profile, a man. It wasn't a name, but it was a thread." Maggie held the phone, the world tilting. The pain was still there, but it was no longer just pain. It was purpose. It was hope. The thread was thin, but it was real. Maggie's advocacy, combined with the 2015 DNA discovery, had put Sonny's case back on the BPD's radar, however briefly, but it was the rise of new media that would truly rekindle the flame. In 2020, a young independent journalist from Louisville named Ben Sipe started a true crime podcast called Bluegrass Gone. His focus was on forgotten Kentucky cases. His third episode was titled The Vanishing of Sonny Davenport. Ben Sipe was a new breed of journalist. He didn't just read old newspaper clippings, he dug. He found Maggie, who was initially hesitant but agreed to an interview. For 3 hours, she poured out the story, the inconsistencies, the dark truck that became a dark sedan, the creepy landlord, the 27-year wait for a single DNA hit. Ben was captivated. The podcast episode was a local sensation. It was downloaded thousands of times in Nelson County alone. People were hearing the full story, not the faded rumors. Ben Sipe tracked down Frank Holloway, the original detective, now retired in Florida. Holloway agreed to talk, his voice gravelly with regret. "We just didn't have the tech," Holloway said on the podcast. "We did the best we could, but the tech and that fabric, we didn't know what to do with it. Yeah, it probably came from her jacket. We didn't know." The podcast generated new tips, most of them the usual psychic visions and false confessions, but it did something far more important. It landed on the desk of Detective Lena Diaz. Diaz had just been assigned to head Bardstown's new, part-time cold case unit, a unit that existed, ironically, thanks to Maggie's lobbying years earlier. Diaz listened to the episode on her drive to work. She heard Maggie's frustration, she heard Holloway's regret, and she heard about the 2015 partial DNA profile. Diaz, unlike Holloway, knew exactly what to do with that. The world of forensics had changed again, dramatically since 2015. She pulled the file, read the 2015 lab report. Partial profile. She made a call to a private lab in Virginia, one specializing in forensic genetic genealogy, FGG. "I have a degraded sample from 1988, Diaz said. "If I can get you the sequence data from the 15 report, can you use it?" The lab specialist was optimistic. "If there's enough data, we can try to build a tree." Diaz now had a new mission. She met Maggie at the library. The two women, a generation apart, connected instantly. Diaz laid out the plan. It was a long shot. It was expensive. "We need to retest the sample, get the full genomic sequence, and then use it to find relatives in public databases," Diaz explained. "It's how they caught the Golden State Killer." Maggie felt a jolt. This was it. This was the moment. The advocacy had created the unit. The unit had hired the detective. The detective had the new technology. All the threads were finally, after 34 years, pulling in the same direction. This block is the cinematic slow-motion climax of the investigation, the moment the past is physically breached. In April 2024, Detective Lena Diaz's meticulous 18-month-long genealogical investigation had finally, agonizingly, narrowed its focus. The familial DNA match from the 1988 denim jacket, traced through a complex family tree starting with a third cousin in Oregon, had pointed definitively to the Vance family of Nelson County. After secretly obtaining a discarded coffee cup from 68-year-old Thomas Vance outside his real estate office, the lab confirmed the direct match. The DNA on the jacket, the DNA of the man who had struggled with Sonny Davenport 36 years ago, belonged to him. The shock of the confirmation was profound. The man who had given interviews, donated to the search fund, and served on the city council for 2 decades. The case was no longer cold, it was explosive. Diaz now had to make the arrest, and she had to do it perfectly. The district attorney was nervous. The DNA proved contact, not murder. He'll say he just touched her jacket, Diaz. He was her landlord. It's plausible. He's the guy, Diaz said, her voice flat. I know it. We move on him, and we move now. The arrest was planned for April 18th, 2024. It was a clear, bright Kentucky spring day, the kind of day that felt full of promise. It was the week of the My Old Kentucky Home Festival. The town was full of tourists and celebrating locals. Diaz had chosen the time deliberately. Maximum disruption, maximum shock. Thomas Vance was hosting a political fundraiser barbecue at his large, historic home on the town's main thoroughfare. Diaz, her partner, and 2 uniformed officers pulled up to the house. The street was lined with cars. Through the wrought iron fence, they could see Vance in his backyard, standing at a large stainless steel grill. He was wearing a pink polo shirt and khaki shorts. He was laughing, holding a spatula, surrounded by his grandchildren and the town's elite. Diaz walked up the stone pathway. Vance saw her. His smile didn't falter. He clearly assumed she was there for security, or perhaps to ask for a donation. Detective, he boomed affably. Glad you could make it. Can I get you a burger? Diaz stopped a few feet from him. The smell of charcoal and cooking meat was thick. The laughter from the party guests died down as they noticed the uniforms. Thomas Vance, Diaz said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden silence. You are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Beth Davenport. The spatula clattered onto the patio stones. Vance's face, for a split second, was not the face of a community pillar. It was the face of a cornered animal, pure, cold panic. He looked at his wife. He looked at the officers. The color drained from his face. This is a joke, right? He stammered. This is insane. You have the right to remain silent, Diaz said, as her partner moved behind Vance to cuff his hands. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. The party guests were frozen, a tableau of horror and disbelief. The man they had trusted, the man they had elected, the man who represented their town, was being led away in handcuffs for a 36-year-old murder. The shockwave was just beginning. The news of Thomas Vance's arrest hit Bardstown like a physical blow. It was the only thing anyone talked about. The BPD held a press conference that afternoon. Detective Diaz, looking exhausted but resolute, stood at the podium. She kept her statement brief, factual. This morning, BPD officers arrested 68-year-old Thomas Vance. He has been charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of tampering with physical evidence in connection with the 1988 disappearance of Sarah Beth Davenport. This arrest is the result of a 36-year investigation, culminating in the use of forensic genetic genealogy. The name Thomas Vance and murder in the same sentence was incomprehensible. This was not some shadowy drifter. This was the man who lit the town's Christmas tree. The media frenzy was instantaneous. News vans with satellite dishes crowded the small town square. Reporters camped out on Vance's street and, inevitably, on Maggie's. For Maggie, the call from Diaz had been a moment of impossible physics. "We got him, Maggie." Just 3 words. She had sat down on her kitchen floor, the phone clutched in her hand, and had been unable to move for an hour. "Him!" she had finally whispered to Diaz. "Vance, are you sure?" "The DNA is a 100% match, Maggie. We are sure." The man who had nodded at her with fake sympathy, the man who had shaken her father's hand at the funeral home when her mother died, the man who had lived his entire, happy, successful life just miles from her, was the monster. The grief and rage were so intertwined it was suffocating. The case was officially and dramatically reopened. Vance, his face stony, pleaded not guilty at his arraignment. He was denied bail. The pillar of the community image was shattered, replaced by the reality of an orange jumpsuit. The legal machine, dormant for 36 years, roared to life. The new district attorney, a sharp, media-savvy woman named Anya Sharma, knew this would be the case of her career. She also knew that the DNA, while a miracle, was not a slam dunk. "The DNA proves contact, Lena," Sharma said, pacing her office. "It puts him at the struggle with the jacket. His defense will say he was just there. Maybe they argued, and someone else came along after and took her. We have to rebuild 1988. We have to find a motive. We have to find her." The arrest wasn't the end of the investigation. It was the beginning of a new, frantic one. They had a suspect in custody, but they still didn't have a body, and they didn't have a full story. The new investigative team assembled in the BPD's main conference room. It was a mix of new-school tech and old-school grit. Detective Lena Diaz, of course, was the lead. Beside her was Detective Marcus Cole, a 30-year veteran of the Louisville PD, brought in for his interrogation expertise. And there was Ben Sipe, the podcaster, who had been officially retained by the DA's office as a civilian investigator. His encyclopedic knowledge of the original file was invaluable. Finally, there was DA Anya Sharma, who ran the meeting with iron-fisted precision. "He's not talking," Sharma said, tapping a pen on a legal pad. "Vance's lawyer is good. He's going to file motions to suppress the DNA, claim the chain of custody on a 36-year-old piece of cloth is broken. We can't rest this on the DNA. We have to find the motive. We have to find her." The team started from zero, assuming nothing from the 1988 file. "Forget the dark sedan," Diaz said, writing on the whiteboard. Maggie's mother's notes and Sal's first statement said, "Dark truck. Let's run Vance's 1988 DMV records." Ben Sipe was already typing on his laptop. "Got it," he said seconds later. "In 1988, Thomas Vance was the registered owner of a 1986 Ford F-150, color midnight blue." A collective chill went through the room. "The cook," Diaz said. "We have to find the cook, Sal." They found Sal, the diner cook, living in a retirement community in Ocala, Florida. He was in his late 70s, his memory foggy. Diaz and Cole flew down. At first, Sal was hesitant, scared. "I told the cops what I saw." "You told them you saw a sedan," Cole said, his voice gentle. Diaz pushed a photo across the table. Not of Vance, not of Sonny. A photo of a 1986 Ford F-150, midnight blue. Sal looked at it. His eyes widened. "His truck," Sal whispered. "Mr. Vance's truck. He was always parking it near the dumpsters to check the pipes," he said. "Was it there that night, Sal?" Diaz asked. Sal's hands were shaking. "Yes, it was there, after I'd closed. After Sonny walked out, I saw him." "Why didn't you say anything?" Sal looked ashamed. "Mr. Vance, he owned the building. He owned everything. He came to see me the next day. He gave me a bonus, a cost of living bonus, $100. He said it was a terrible tragedy, and it was probably some drifter in a dark sedan. He said, sedan, I had a family. He agreed. It was the crack they needed. Vance wasn't just a witness. He was at the scene at the time of the disappearance, in the truck that was seen, and he had actively redirected the investigation. The team now had a foundation. They had the DNA link, they had the truck, and they had a witness, Sal, who placed Vance at the scene at the exact time of the abduction, actively lying to police. But Sharma was relentless. "Motive," she said back in the conference room. "Why? A robbery? Why would Tom Vance rob a waitress for her tips? He was a successful businessman." "Was he?" Ben Sipe asked again at his laptop. He wasn't just a podcaster. He was a deep-dive researcher. Public image is one thing. Let's check the 1988 county clerk and bank records. It took 2 days of digging through dusty archive microfilm, but Sipe found it. In the spring of 1988, Thomas Vance was not thriving. He was over-leveraged. A real estate deal in a neighboring county had gone bad. He was facing foreclosure on 2 properties, including, crucially, the building that housed the old Kentucky diner. He was desperate for cash. "Okay," Diaz said, "so he's in financial trouble. How does that connect to Sonny?" The team moved on to re-interviewing every living person who had worked at the diner. They found a waitress, Cindy, who had been Sonny's closest friend at the diner. She was now a grandmother, living in Ohio. Diaz spoke to her on the phone. "Oh, God," Cindy said, her voice trembling when Diaz explained. "Tom Vance, I never thought. Did Sonny ever say anything about him?" Diaz asked. Cindy was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, she thought he was creepy, but she felt sorry for him. A week before she vanished. God, I forgot all about this. She told me he'd been in the diner late, looking at the books. He was crying, just crying at the booth. Sonny went to talk to him. He told her he was ruined, that the bank was going to take everything. Did she say anything else? She said he offered her a proposition. He said, a smart, pretty girl like you. You could help me. We could help each other. She said she just laughed it off, told him she wasn't that kind of girl, but it spooked her. She told me she felt slimy after. The motive was no longer murky. It was a sickening, clear picture. A desperate man facing financial ruin, rejected by the young waitress he'd propositioned. It wasn't a planned robbery. It was a crime of rage. A dark truck and a leaky pipe became the linchpin. Vance, armed with his legitimate reason for being there, waited in his truck for Sonny, his ego wounded, his life collapsing. He was a powder keg, and Sonny's rejection was the match. The robbery theory was a red herring. He hadn't taken her purse for the tips. He'd taken it to make it look like a robbery. The wall of evidence was now overwhelming. The DNA, the truck, the witness placing him at the scene, the financial motive, the newly revealed story of his desperation and rejection. Anya Sharma's team had built a 36-year-old case in 6 weeks. Thomas Vance, sitting in a jail cell, his high-priced lawyer at his side, saw the fortress he had built around himself for 36 years crumble. A trial would be a media circus. It would expose his family to every sordid detail, and with the combined weight of the DNA and Sal's new testimony, a conviction was all but certain. Sharma, knowing a conviction was likely, but a body was still missing, offered a deal, a plea. "He pleads guilty to second-degree murder," Sharma told Vance's lawyer. "He waives all right to appeal. He gives us the full, unvarnished truth. And he tells us where she is. He tells Maggie where her sister is. He does that, and we take the death penalty off the table. Life, with the possibility of parole in 25 years. Vance, 68 years old, knew 25 years was a life sentence. He accepted. The confession took place in a sterile, windowless interrogation room. Vance was thin, his face grey. He spoke in a monotone, his eyes fixed on the table. I was in a bad place," he began, his voice a dry rasp. "The banks. I was losing everything. I saw Sunny. She was so full of life. I'd offered. I thought we could have an arrangement. She laughed at me." He recounted the night. He'd been drinking. He saw Sal leave. He saw Sunny walk to her car. "I just wanted to talk to her, to explain." He'd parked his truck near the dumpsters. He got out. He grabbed her arm. "She fought," he whispered. "She was strong. She screamed, not loud, just a shout. She clawed at me. She tore her jacket on the fence. This was the moment the DNA was left, a microscopic witness. I didn't mean to. I hit her, to quiet her down, just once. But he was a strong man, fueled by rage and whiskey. He hadn't just hit her. "She fell," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "She fell back and her head hit the trailer hitch on my truck. It made a sound." He shuddered, lost in the memory. "She didn't move. There was blood. I panicked. I knew she was gone. I panicked." He put her body in the bed of his truck, covered it with the tarp. He grabbed her purse to make it look like a robbery. He drove. "Where did you take her, Thomas?" Diaz asked, her voice cold as iron. "Bernheim," he whispered. "Bernheim Forest. I used to go hunting there, off the main trail. There's an old logging road. I buried her." He drew them a map. The confession was a brutal, ugly end to the mystery, but it provided the one thing Maggie had prayed for, a location. The next morning, a caravan of BPD vehicles, forensic vans, and a car carrying Detective Diaz and Maggie drove to the Bernheim Forest. Thomas Vance, in cuffs and an orange jumpsuit, was in the lead car, directing them. The forest was beautiful, the morning light filtering through the new spring leaves. It felt obscene to be there. "This road," Vance said from the back of the car. "Turn here." They followed an old, overgrown logging road for nearly a mile, then stopped. "Here," Vance said, pointing to a small clearing, unremarkable, covered in leaves and brush. "I put her. Over there, by that big oak." The forensic team began to work. They set up a grid. Maggie watched from the car, her body numb. She couldn't get out. Diaz stayed with her. They sat in silence for 2 hours as the team carefully, reverently removed the topsoil. Then a small shout. "Hold!" One of the technicians had found something. A piece of degraded fabric, then a bone. They worked for another hour, brushing away 36 years of earth, and then Diaz's radio crackled. "Detective, you need to see this." Diaz got out, walked over. Maggie, as if pulled by an invisible string, followed. In the shallow grave, among the skeletal remains of her sister, was a small, incongruous piece of plastic. It was bright, unmistakable, having survived 36 years underground. It was Maggie's turquoise hair clip. The last thing Sonny had worn, the object Maggie had lent her with a casual "don't lose it." Maggie collapsed. The sound she made was not a cry, but a release. A 36-year-old howl of grief and relief that echoed through the silent trees. The truth, finally, had a physical form. The long wait was over. Sarah Beth Davenport was, at last, found. The sentencing hearing was set for July 2024. The courtroom was packed. It was the hottest day of the year, and the courtroom's old air conditioner was losing the fight, but no one left. The entire town of Bardstown, it seemed, was holding its breath. Thomas Vance, thinner and older-looking, was led in. He avoided looking at the gallery, at the front row where Maggie sat. This time, Maggie was not alone. She was surrounded by the friends and family who had searched with her, by Ben Sipe, and by a quiet, retired man in a rumpled suit, Frank Holloway, who had driven up from Florida. He had to see the end of the case that had broken him. Because it was a plea deal, there was no trial, no jury, just the formality of the sentence. But the judge allowed for victim impact statements. Maggie, who had not spoken publicly since the arrest, walked to the podium. She was 52 years old. She had been 16 when this began. She placed a single laminated photo on the podium. It was Sonny, not the faded high school picture, but a snapshot from a week before she died, laughing, holding her guitar. "Her name was Sarah Beth," Maggie began, her voice shaking but clear. "We called her Sonny. For 36 years, you let us search. You let us hope. You watched my mother die of a broken heart, waiting for a daughter you knew was buried in the woods." She looked directly at Thomas Vance. He would not meet her eyes. "You lived your life. You built a business. You raised a family. You shook our hands. You built a life on my sister's grave. You took her future. You stole her from us, and you stole her from herself. She never got to play that festival. She never went to Nashville. She never got married or had children." The courtroom was utterly silent, save for the sound of quiet weeping. "Today," Maggie continued, "the law will give you a sentence. But your judgment is already complete. You are a small, hollow man. You are the darkness. But my sister was Sonny, and you did not extinguish her. We remember her, we love her, and today we finally have justice for her." The judge imposed the sentence: life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 25 years. Vance would be 93. It was a life sentence. As Vance was led away, his head bowed, Maggie walked out of the courtroom, past the crush of cameras, and into the sunlight. She was met by Detective Lena Diaz. The two women didn't speak, they just embraced. It had taken 36 years, 4 months, and 10 days, but the case of Sarah Beth Davenport was, finally, closed. The aftermath was a time of quiet reflection. Sarah Beth "Sonny" Davenport was buried in the Bardstown Cemetery in the plot next to her mother, Evelyn. The headstone was new, but the dates chiseled into the granite were 1966, 1988. Below her name, Maggie had one more line engraved: "Finally home." The town, having processed the shock, began to heal. The name Thomas Vance was stripped from the park benches and the charity plaques. His business was dissolved. His family moved away, seeking anonymity. His name became a new kind of cautionary tale. Maggie's work, however, was not done. Kentucky's Forgotten, the small non-profit she had started in her basement, received a flood of national attention and donations in the wake of the case. It was soon funded by the state, becoming a permanent resource, a partner to the KSP, advocating for families and helping fund the very genealogical testing that had found Sonny. Detective Lena Diaz was given a departmental commendation, but she always said the credit belonged to Maggie and to the science that refused to let the past stay buried. The case of Sonny Davenport became a staple at forensic training seminars, a perfect tragic example of persistence. Frank Holloway sent Maggie a long, handwritten letter asking for her forgiveness for the failures of 1988. She wrote him back 2 words: "You came." The old Kentucky Diner building, which had been a laundromat, was torn down in 2025 to make way for a small park. Ben Sipe, the podcaster, successfully lobbied the city council to name it Sonny's Rest. The city, eager to cleanse the wound, agreed. At the park's dedication, Maggie, now a grandmother herself, watched her son David play guitar on a small stage. He was playing one of Sonny's old songs, the chords transcribed from her dusty notebook. The sun was setting over the Kentucky hills, and the light was golden. Maggie looked at the small bronze plaque near the entrance, which told her sister's story. The long silence was over. The story had been told. The silence that lasted 36 years was finally broken by a new generation of science, and by a sister who refused to let her be forgotten. But for every Sonny Davenport whose case is solved, there are thousands of other names in cold, forgotten files. Their families are still waiting. If you know of a case that deserves a new spotlight, please share their story in the comments below. And if you believe that no case should ever truly go cold, and that every victim deserves their name to be said, please like this video and subscribe. Your attention can be the one thing that makes a difference.